Hey, I'm Tim Sickles. I'll be tying the Foam is Home stone here. It's a pattern I've been working on for a while, using two different types of foam for the body and the head. We'll start just by take this barbless hopper hook and I'm just going to dress it back to the bend. Don't need to be real clean here. We're just wrapping back so that we can tie our rubber legs in, give it something to bite into. So I'm going to use this is just for the tail, brown and tan barred rubber leg. So I'm going to come back up towards the eye here, and I'm actually going to tie in. So you see I cut off just one leg, and I'll start by looping it in half, then take and tie in the tips here. And then as I wrap back to the bend of the hook, I'm going to stretch these legs, and it allows me to guide it a little bit. And then once I've got these tied in, you'll see the legs should sit right on top. I'll come in and trim these, trim maybe a hair longer than the hook gape is. Then I'm going to take my 1mm foam. You'll see I've already colored the edge on this one orange. So this is a cinnamon 1mm foam, just regular craft foam. And then you're going to take and cut on an angle here, a little steeper angle. And what this does, when I start this, if I don't cut that angle, it's going to create a bit of a bump where I'm tying in here at the back. And by cutting that, it allows me to have a little bit more of a taper as the fly goes from the back to the front. So I'm going to tie that in by the tip. You don't want to tie in by the very tip, otherwise you more than likely will break it when you start to wrap. So I'm going to wrap my thread back up towards the eye, and then using my rotary feature, going to wrap this, and then for each wrap probably want to cover a third to half of the previous piece of foam, so you're exposing about 2/3 of the foam as you wrap forward. And I'll stop and tie this off, and then you can just take and rip that foam off. Doesn't need to look pretty, that's all going to be covered up when we're done. So tie some of that foam down. No, not a big deal. Like I said, it's all going to be covered up. Then we're going to take another 1mm piece of foam. This is it's the same stuff, just this is in tan, and then I've cut it with the River Road STONEFLY body or ant body. I'm not sure which one it is. We're going to tie that in for the wing. You can see what I've got there. The foam about even with the back of the hook. Just make sure that's secured, and we'll nip that off. And then tie down those corners. Again, it doesn't have to be pretty. We're going to cover all this up. Now we're going to take some elk hair. I'm using the Nature's Spirit Select Cow Elk, just the natural color. And I'm going to cut off about about a pencil diameter piece of foam or hair, taking out all the under fur. I'll take my comb and clean out the rest of it. Pluck out any short hairs or blunt ends. And take and stack that. Now once we've got them stacked, if you see any short ones, pull those out of there. Looks like I've got a broken end. Try and get that out. And then I'm going to tie those in so that they're before they're tied in, they're sticking just a hair past that foam wing. And then when we go to tie them in, they'll flare a little bit, and they should be about even with that wing. So a couple loose wraps, and then pull up, flare that, make sure it's tied in real good. And then do the old elk-hair caddis trick and secure by pulling a third back and tying it in a couple more times. That helps to secure it. I will trim those ends off. This doesn't need to be pretty at all. It's all going to be covered up. Just make sure you get all your blunt ends. Okay, now we're going to tie in the head using just regular 2mm craft foam, cinnamon color. I'm going to do this similar to how Cheech does his stone flopper head, the foam bullet head. So we'll tie in first the top side. We want to tie it as close up behind the eye as possible. Get that secured. Do the same thing on the bottom. One thing I should probably mention, the piece of foam that I'm using is a little wider than you'd probably think, and that's because we're going to pull and stretch it to create the head. So now tying down this little bump of foam that I created at the tie-in point there. I'm going to fold these back one at a time to create this first segment for the head. Tie in the top, flip it over, tie in the bottom. Now I'm going to pull these pieces of foam back one at a time, and I snuck that through my thread through as I pulled the foam back on the top. Now if you pull these back for just a second, they should sit there out of your way to wrap your foam back over your hair. And now I'm going to tie in the at the thorax here and create a little larger bump than I created for the head. And do these one at a time, tie in the top and then the bottom. And I always like to flip it over when I tie in the bottom just so I can see what it looks like. Now if you have to, you can kind of wiggle the foam back and forth to close the gaps on the side. Now we've got that tied in, we're going to cut these pieces of foam a little differently on the top and the bottom. So I'm going to do the bottom first, flip it upside down. I'm just going to hold this piece of foam straight up in the air and cut it straight across. I don't want to pull it too tight because there's a chance that foam could pull back and come undone. And then on the top, get a little fancier. I'm going to cut it a little V notch out of here. See, when we're done, we got a little V, kind of like the wing. Creates a nice little appearance from underneath. Then we're going to take just regular old brown rubber legs, round rubber legs, and I'm going to tie 2 knots in this, one for each leg. So I'll do the first one, and if you leave yourself a longer length of rubber leg, it makes this a lot easier, so you're not fighting a little tiny piece of it. So we create our first one. Our second one. And now one little trick on these two, you can see when I first pulled that knot's kind of loose. If I pull that one more time, you see it cinches right down. And when that cinches down, you don't even need super glue on it. I've never had one of these come undone on me. So now we're going to take and tie in these legs one at a time. do my side first. And then before you tie them in too tight, you see this one actually laid down pretty good for me. But if you have it loose, you can take and roll those around and get them into position. Do the same thing on this side. So that one. I want to have it so that I'll call it a knee, the joint lands about halfway down the body. So now, make a couple wraps once you got those secured. Pinch the two legs together at the front. I like to do it about a 1/4 inch beyond the eye of the hook. And the back legs, I leave about a 1/4 inch beyond the joint. So now I'm going to take and whip finish here right at the same spot where I've tied everything in. Using the orange thread creates kind of a nice color pop between the segments. And then I'm going to finish it off, because these legs sometimes like to move around. I'm going to take just a dab of super glue on the end of my bodkin, and I'm going to put that right in the gap there, and that secures those legs. They won't go anywhere. And that's the Foam is Home stone.